Welcome to NightLight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is NightLight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome to NightLight, everybody. So glad you could join with us again. This is our 6th week with Gary Wayne. We're going into his first book of the Genesis 6 Conspiracy. We're all the way up to section 6, which is Rendezvous with Destiny, the Anatomy of a Global Conspiracy. It presents the evidence to the scope of the contemporary conspiracy by the descendants of giants, secret societies, and numerous religions to reincarnate the Atlantean age led by the Antichrist. It's been so far an extraordinary journey. This is a book that I have read at least 3 times, 4 times. I don't know. I've lost count because we've had Gary on so often, and every time I try to refresh myself by rereading the book, and every time I reread it, I find new material that I saw before but kind of didn't absorb. This time we're going through it section by section, and I am learning so much more about the different sections and the material they have within them and how it applies to the here and now. And as we're getting this far into the book, it is coming to the point where it is addressing the contemporary times. He's brought it all the way through post-Diluvian material all the way up till today. And it's a little overwhelming. A lot of bubbles of mine have been burst. I guess, enlightenment bursts the bubbles sometimes. And it is just as fascinating to see how things continue to evolve in spite of world wars and countries changing and all sorts of reigns going from here to there and everywhere, and to see how things are beginning to work out and be able to apply what has been said in Genesis 6 to everyday stuff that's going on now. And it's phenomenal. We have, after this week, 2 more weeks, and then I guess he's just going to have to get that 3rd book published so we can go at it again, because this has been occasion and a half. And all of the different sections are on the YouTube channel. If you want to go back to the beginning, read the section, listen to how Gary explains it. It's an amazing course in this phenomenal book that he has researched, pardon the term, the bejesus out of. So welcome to the show, Gary. Thank you for giving us so many weeks of your time and helping to bring a lot of this material forward into contemporary times so we can apply it to the here and the now.
Yeah, so thank you for inviting me back. Glad to be here, and do like this section for sure, because, when you're talking about in the other sections of stuff that happened even 1,000 years ago, let alone 2,000 or 6,000 or however far back we want to go, because the book goes back a long ways. And section 4 was about prophecy. So now you're looking into the future, right? So the last section was sort of how the organizations start to emerge with a renewed Western emphasis to bring about world government and a universal religion and bring about the end time. And this section here that we're talking about tonight we talk about the sort of the major players that are involved. And when I say players, individuals and organizations, but it's the organizations because this is a transgenerational organizational structure. And so we talk about the main proponents that are working actively that we can see in the headlines today if we want to look at the names of the people and what organizations that they belong to as to what they're doing. And you can start to follow the march, even though they are frustrated because the timetable isn't as fast as what the globalists would like it. They are still always doubling down. It's always a continuous march forward. So, you can look at the last pestilence, and they tried a lot of things, and they moved the agenda forward in that theater, but not as far as they wanted to, but they learned a lot. So if there's another repeat of that type of theater, then you can bet that they're going to be prepared and move the ball down the road again. So it's important what I liked about this section is now people can put their arms around the concepts that have been talked about, and they can start to put faces and organizations to who is trying to bring this whole thing about, even though it's still done in 1,000 seemingly disparate types of groups that aren't working together, but they're all following the same playbook.
I think what fascinated me the most was that, now I'm beginning to recognize names and organizations, and I mean certainly the St. Clairs, but with this particular chapter we got into the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, and names that I'm very familiar with, and I'm wondering when you just take the Rockefeller name as an example, St. Clair's, always Freemasonry and, bringing that forward. But do these current families, are they aware of what they're doing, or are they just very, very greedy and they don't even understand what they're putting forward and what they're working towards? Because, I mean, I knew the Rockefellers, not personally, but, they had estates that were, you could drive by and you say, hey, that's where the Rockefellers live and stuff like that. So are they on an individual basis, are they aware of what they're doing? Or is it just genetically ingrained inside of them that they aren't even aware of what they're doing?
It's personal interest, and they know what they're doing. So when we look at the American sort of royalty, if we can call them that, they are distant bloodlines. So they're what is known as pseudo blue bloods. And so the blue bloods are the pure ones. The Americans are very so far distant that they're not even considered royal, but still mundane. So to eliminate that mundaneness, and I know that's not a word, but just to get that term out there for people to think about, because they look at humans as mundane and people who don't have their knowledge as mundane and not worthy to know the knowledge, that even though they have new money, they are going to have to learn about things and start to participate. And in reward for that, their children will be able to intermarry into the bloodlines and will ennoble themselves and move up into that hierarchy, because the purity of the bloodlines and the scions that are grafted in is where you fit into that culture. So these aren't, as we understand the American movement and sponsorship, understand that the United States was created to be the vehicle to bring about world government, and that its whole structure from the states, independent states with a central government, is to be the model for the world government that they were experimenting with. And so the families that are being funded, is the best way to do it, comes from the Rothschilds, who are funded by the Royals. And the Rothschilds are the banking arm, and the Rothschilds form partnerships with all the other banking arms in Europe, but they are the sort of juggernaut of the banking arms, and that they will fund certain families in North America. They will become their stable of agents who are loyal to the Rothschilds and will do their beckoning no matter what. Now, as you get further down into the generations, you might lose a little bit of that grasp over top, but don't ever think the Rockefellers have more money than the Rothschilds, and do not think that the Rothschilds have more money than the Bourbon family, for example, or the Anjou family, or the Windsor family. That's just how the whole system sets up. So you have families in the U.S. like the Rockefellers, like the Morgans, J.P. Morgans, like the Carnegies, like the DuPonts, and on and on and on. The whole litany of Ivy League families were funded by the Europeans to be their attack dog and to bring about world government. And so even in the beginning of the United States, everything is closely associated with breaking away from the Jacobite movement and the Masonic movement. Just as the Jacobite movement is going to be exported to France, it's going to also start to bring about a French Revolution as well. So you have these rivalries that are going on, but when you look at the connection of Freemasonry to the constitutional writers or most of the founding American fathers, there's well over half that are Masonic, and other ones will be just part of lower level sort of orders. So when people look at the United States seal, for example, it's engraved with the words Annuit Coepites, which is Latin for announcing the birth of. And then it's followed by Novus Ordo Seclorum, which basically is the new order of the world, or the new world order as we sort of understand it. Now, some people say, well, no, it should be more Seclorum as being secular, as we understand secular today, not as secular as it would have been understood in the Roman beast empire, from where the Latin word comes from. And that order was distinctly polytheist and distinctly Sol Invictus and Mithraism as the two main proponent religions that I also cover off in this section, that are sort of interwoven into this global Gnosticism that's going to become the universal religion. So it's not secular. Seculars are puppets of polytheism. People just don't know that there's a puppeteer behind pulling the strings. So we'll see that become more obvious as we get closer to the last 7 years and the rise of Babylon. But we have to understand that the United States is got families that are going to play a very large role in what's going on. They're just not calling the shots. And they likely won't be.
I think what really blew me away when you were going about, through the hierarchies of the Freemasons, and you kept mentioning the Committee of 300, and I thought, wait a minute, who is the Committee of 300? And I looked it up, I Googled it, and I was blown away by the names that were in the Committee of 300. Yeah. I mean, it just, and I recommend everybody go and look at it, because you will not believe the names that are there. Certainly, the European royalty is there, because they still have their titles and everything, which is really very impressive. But when you find the names in there that belong to people who are in government that you never would have expected, that are on this committee of 300, and I'm not bringing out names exactly because I want people to go look and see just who's there, because you will not believe some of the names that are there. And I was very upset by some of the names, I have to admit, because if that committee is part of this whole the hierarchy of what's going on and about to go on for the next however many generations left we've got, that these people have been working within our government to defeat our government, which really upset me greatly.
So these the Committee of 300 we should better understand as the invisible ones in the older sort of nature, and Committee of 300 families, and that the 300 symbolizes 300 patriarch angels of the bloodline. So the celestial mafia godfathers, there's 300 of these families, and so that's a lot of family bloodlines, and obviously a lot of rivals, and that the 300 has a lot of significance in Greek history, especially with the 300 that were the guard of the king. And so expect maybe 300 guards that will be surrounding Antichrist so that he can walk amongst the masses in the end time. But the 300 is an organization that is third on the rank on that thelemic trunk that I talk about in book 2, and I reference back. And so below the Committee of 300 are the Rosicrucians. Below that is the Illuminati, and below that is Freemasonry, which has first level of adepthood. And so every rank up there has a degree. In the old York system, third degree is first level of adept and Freemasonry, equivalent to being split up 11 times for the Scottish Rite of 33rd degree. And so you have this understanding that these degrees go significantly higher. And just as you have that 11 times 3 as a sort of a sacred prime number for the Scottish Rite, you have as many as 99 degrees in the old York Rite. So now if you're looking at that same sort of ratio, it's multiplying by 3 more on the 33. That would be ultimately if they were to go up, but it's the old system that the bloodlines are on. And so the Committee of 300, it is the organization that looks after the money. It's the money that keeps the royals in power, and that to do everything they want to do, they have to control the money, and their money isn't on the books. I have no idea how much they have, other than it is unimaginable, but they can pull that money out, likely gold that they've been hoarding for thousands of years, at any point in time they want, and to utilize it. And in Nostradamus's prophecies, not that I look at it as canon, but I look at it through the lens of polytheism, as with him being a Rosicrucian prophet. He talks about in the end time, in the time of the Antichrist, there's this money that comes out of nowhere to fund the empires that they're going to fund, and then to bring about Antichrist. Now, today, we might look at the Davos crew, the G20 and the B20, which is a branch organization. So Klaus answers into it through his organization of the Davos organization, and that would be like a center organization that would be at the top of the branch that links into the trunk organization. And so what the Committee of 300 does is they control these types of organizations. They also control organizations like the International Monetary Fund. They control the World Bank. They control the World Trade Organization. Anything that has to do with banking, trade, and commerce, anything that has to do with wealth, they control. That's how powerful they are, and yet they're not the top organization, because you have the Council of 33 families above the Committee of 300, and then you have the 13 families above that. So, and that's just the Western families. So when we look at the Committee of 300, they're going to have families that are in there that are more than just Rex Deus that I talk about, but they're going to have the black nobility from the Italians that are in there. They're going to have the Greek bloodlines that are in there. They're going to be an expanded group than just the descendant monarchs of Germany and Austria and France and England and Spain. So even when we get to some of the families like the Bourbon family and the Hanover-Windsor family and families like that, they're getting closer to those ancient families, but they still may be a step away.
Well, to me, I mean, first of all, I think I knew the Federal Reserve was not a part of the government. I guess I knew it was privately owned, but I hadn't made the connection that the Federal Reserve is not only privately owned, but it's privately owned by these people that are power mongers.
The banking cartel, yeah. That will include American banks, but also the European banks in there. And so, yeah, they have complete control over the monetary system in the United States, which is why the president's not generally permitted to interfere with what they do. And they got a hold of it and created the Reserve Bank through skullduggery. And it was, it was organized on between the Morgans and the Rockefellers in secret, and they waited until the Christmas break, where people who opposed forming the reserve were going home for Christmas, and then they put the vote on the floor and got it passed that way. That was the first reserve bank in the world that has been exported all around the world, and there's very few countries that has a reserve bank. So, countries that didn't take it on, they were targeted for coups and military takeover to be able to put reserve banks in place. They didn't quite get them all into our modern time, but there's only a handful of countries that don't have it. And now you see a counter reserve banking system that's rising, that's opposing the Europeans. So the Europeans are trying to impose their will onto the world, and other bloodlines outside of Europe are pushing back.
Yeah, it's phenomenal to take this kind of knowledge and then apply it to what's going on in the world today. I was blown away that in many ways we were actually funding both sides of World War II, which upset me greatly. The thought that the aspect of war is repulsive to me. It's senseless. It's just awful, and yet it seems to be something that these organizations thrive over, because they can fund both sides and get rich off of all of it, and nobody notices.
And seemingly the deaths are part of the polytheist sacrifice to the gods. So, yeah, if one of the things that if people want to start to sort of take a step back and say, well, how do I identify who's good guys and bad guys? And it's really difficult, because they have white hats and black hats within their movement, right? And it's the white hats that people look at and say, oh, well, they're looking after our better interests. But no, they have the same agenda. They're just being nicer to us early on, but the agenda will be the same at the end. So when we look at how to establish them. Follow the money. Who has all the money? And who has the greatest amount of money as you look into that hierarchy. But also look to their rituals and their oath-based systems as a clue to who these bloodlines are. And also look for a couple other common denominators. One is that they will be totally perpetual war. That's what they do. They have, just as the Nephilim were warriors and were brutal and they would attack each other and humans, and have done that through the royales all throughout our history and continue to do that even as we speak today with the wars on trying to shuffle a geopolitical makeup for the end time that's taking place right now. They are perpetual war. Anybody who is for perpetual war, like having the start of the Ukraine war and creating the environment to do it and funding them by shutting down U.S. oil supply so that Putin can wage war with the high price of oil, and threatening to put NATO into to include the Ukraine, which was a red line for Putin. And this is not to make Putin a good guy. It's just that we have to understand that this war didn't have to happen, and that, you know, Obama overthrew the legitimate government of the Ukraine, which caused the first invasion. So there's a history of these governments and bloodlines and ones who are taking orders, in this case, Obama and Biden from the bloodlines, to continue perpetual war. They love to have wars. And if they get tired of that war, they just shut that down after they've created enough destruction. They move on and start more wars. They're never there to end a war. They're there to drag it out for as long as possible so that those in the bloodlines and the noble elite who are either shareholders or owners of companies that make weapons and or banking grow rich from it, and all the other things that need to be supplied to continue perpetual war. So globalism is the other thing. If they are globalist, they are either of the bloodline or they're working for the bloodlines. And so it's pretty easy to spot them, and that eventually they'll take off their secular cloak on everything, and they'll go back to the Enochian mysticism of the Nephilim before the flood and Babylon as we know it after the flood, and they're going to impose the new Templar dream of world government in the new Babylon through the Catholic Church and through the country that the Templars first plotted to find and then set up, which is the United States, across the seas to bring about the New World Order. And if people don't think that the Templars knew about it, the Sinclairs were sailing to North America and set up Oak Island, for example, well before Columbus came. I would say probably, the Norse got there first with Eric the Red or Leif Erikson. I can't remember which one. But still, they were there. They knew about it. And so much so that Columbus is said to have gotten his intel on the currents and where to go and how to do the navigation from the Templars, and in return, he flew the Templar flag on the Santa Maria in honor of being provided that knowledge.
Well, now all these organizations have the same end game, but they are assuming that they will be at the head. And this is where division into 10 different units trying to create a one world order, I find it hard to believe that anybody is going to agree to merge so that there's only one, because everybody would want to be the head of that one.
Yeah, and if you're just one of the 300 families of the West, and there's only 10 kings of the world empire before it goes down to one, then that causes rivalries and tensions between bloodlines, not only within alliances, but all over the world. That's very, very cutthroat. And the Royals are notorious throughout their history of knocking off the king and replacing him with another that gets replaced a couple of years later because that king's been knocked off. That's their nature. That's their history. That's what they'll continue to do. So this is going to be messy as the geopolitical bloodlines set up. So they're going to be empire building, which means they're going to have to conquer bloodlines and create vassals underneath them within that hierarchy to make that happen. And that's going to take a lot of war. And so there's things to be done. So we bring that back sort of biblically in terms of the fig tree generation that I do think that we're in, but we're still in the sorrows, and wars and rumors of war plague the fig tree generation as the geopolitical network is being set up. But it is such a difficult task to do so that they won't be able to get this union or get it narrowed down to an alliance that's going to work with each other, even though it will be like iron and clay is the allegory in Daniel 2, that it will be very strong and powerful, but also brittle because iron doesn't mix that well with clay. And so there's going to be these wars that go through until you have the rise of Babylon, and it will be the universal religion first introduced by the false prophets who are going to make prophecies of contrived catastrophes that will take place so that people convert, that is going to permit the world to say we have to compromise and we're going to destroy ourselves from the face of the earth unless we create this 10 empire alliance.
Well, it's very reminiscent of Egypt and Europe in some ways, where the way to the throne is gotten through bloodshed. And, you know, if you have brothers and sisters who are in line for the throne, best to kill them so that they can't kill you to take over the crown. And it feels like that same process is going to be ongoing here, where you know, it will, and that death cult for power has probably helped humanity so that the population wouldn't be as large as they could be if they weren't warring with each other all the time and trying to kill their own family all the time. We haven't seen a lot of that killing of the family like it has been done for most of their reign in this last generation or two, but it's still there. And those rules are still in play. And they will follow those rules and eliminate rivals as they go, just as they still utilize the ancient inheritance right of the king that goes back to before the flood, and then again a restart of the kingships that they usurp after the flood as well. So King Charles III, who is a royal, he was doing the ancient ritual that goes right back into the myths of prehistory to receive the divine right to rule from his patriarchal celestial mafia godfather. Wow. And you know, I was surprised to see his name on the list. I was surprised to see his sister's name on the list as well. I mean, there were names that I was just, you know, and as far as the United States goes, there were names that I was shocked. So, you know, it looks as though, I mean, I one world government to me is to me it's a good idea if ever it can be done peacefully. But it sounds like there's bloodshed all over the place in order to create it, and once it's created, it doesn't work. So
yeah,
and
so much so that it breaks down before the midpoint of the last 7 years. So after it's sealed with the covenant, 7-year covenant that's prophesied in Daniel 9:27, you have a large piece of the Eastern empires who are going to invade Israel. And it's going to look like Armageddon. And even the descriptions are very similar with Armageddon, but it's the Ezekiel 38 and 39 war, Joel 1 and 2, and Revelation 9 war, and that's in the time of the trumpets. And this is going to be so awful that it's going to look like Armageddon, 33% destruction of the world and all of the people. And then Antichrist will take credit for that because he's rising to power in the last 7 years after negotiating the covenant of death, and that he will take credit for this war that looks like Armageddon, and it'll fit into his pedigree and time-wise that he comes before Jesus does, because Antichrist not only means like a false Messiah or is a opposite of Christ, an enemy of Christ, but also means before in the other form. Instead of ANTI as it's transliterated with the prefix into English, ANTE means before. And so it also means replacement as well. So he replaces Christ. So he's going to fulfill all of that, but he needs an Armageddon war to take credit for, because Jesus comes back lest all flesh would be saved, and he's going to come in on that wave of peace, and he's going to promise the new 1,000-year reign of peace, which is, the millennium that Jesus is going to offer, or the new age, or the new Atlantis, and that, or the new age of Atlantis, the golden age, and he's going to promise peace. But again, there's not going to be peace in those last 3.5 years either.
Well, I was going to say, in order for this to happen, in order for someone to come in and be a leader that unifies, it can't be, it can't be a shepherd. It can't be somebody who is, common, I guess is the better word. It has to be someone who has worked their way into some of these groups. It has to be someone that comes from one of these groups, I would think, that had power in order to be able to get the attention of people, in order to pull people together. Would it not?
Typically, in the way this world works, yes. It doesn't mean you won't have occasionally non-bloodline people that might come to power, but certainly not on this kind of scale. And that he is going to receive supernatural knowledge, and he's going to be a master of war and intrigue. And he's going to be able to do miracles, and he's going to be able to do things that nobody else is going to be able to do on his level, even though there's going to be multiple Antichrist wannabes competing at the same time. So we have to be patient, because he rises amongst these 10 kings of Antichrist-like figures, and he will overthrow 3 of them as he's rising to power at the midpoint, and then the 10 kings will hand their power over to him, and that they will then overthrow Babylon, and he will introduce a new religion. So yes, one would presume then he will have a pedigree not only back to Nephilim and through the Quinatar allegories of the Merovingian bloodline, which goes back to Baphomet, just as Baphomet means Father Mithra, and this is a mighty angel, as he's understood in that setting as Baphomet. That's the head that the Templars worshipped. And Baphomet is a goat god. He's a degraded seraphim watcher. This is likely Azazel, who I'll cover off in detail again in the last section of this book, and we covered in other sections. And that, he's described in the language of the Templars as Agios Icaros, Baphomet. So Agio is basically a term that is leading into the key word that is Icaros, which is the Greek word for a mighty angel, as it's translated in the book of Revelation. So look for a pedigree, because Antichrist is known as the son of perdition. And the son of perdition goes back to a series of Greek words that includes Apollo and Apollyon. Apollyon is the Greek name for the destroyer leader of the Watchers who comes out of the pit prison just before the midpoint. Abaddon is the Hebrew word. And so he has this association with the one who comes up out of the pit, as is described in Revelation 11 as the one who kills the two witnesses. And just as Antichrist in Revelation 17 is the one who was, now is not, but will be again, and comes up out of the pit. So he has a relationship with not only Satan, who gives him his power, but also with another dragon and degraded seraphim, Baphomet, which is likely Azazel, although there are other degraded goat gods in most societies around the world, and the most famous ones would be Odin, who's a horn god, Cernunnos, Cern, as it's understood in the Etruscan Indo-Aryan pantheon, and there's several ones by the name of Pan and names associated with that in the Greek side. And the Indo-Aryan word for horn god is Cern, or Kern. It's translated with a K-E-R-N or a C-E-R-N. And that is not a coincidence. And so when we look at another allegorical name for this great monarch that the Western bloodlines say is going to come, it's the Lord Maitreya is his allegorical name that comes at the start of every new age. Or at the end of the age and leads into the new age. And that word, Lord Maitreya, it's just absolutely crazy how this is all sort of laid into it. It is an Indo-Aryan word. And so the M-A-I-T-R of the Y-A is sort of separate. That mitre there that comes out of Indo-Aryan is mitre, as in that hat of the ancient Sumerians, which is like that big fish head hat. And also Mithra is the god of the Zoroastrians. And this is Mithra, whose birth date was December 25, that they have implemented as Jesus' birth date, which is wrong by the details. His birth would be more in late September or early October. And Mithra was one of the main religions of the Roman Empire. And he's also known as the great architect of the universe, just as Lucifer in the Gnostic religions is understood as the great architect of the universe. So all of these connections take them back to the Quintatar bloodline that in their mythos goes back to the celestial mafia godfather Azazel, or a god like that, and that they keep their genealogies to be able to present their pedigree. And as we also talked about last week in the section, is the bloodlines that they will also scion in, which includes King Saul's bloodline through Mary Magdalene, and the Sicambian Franks, which were had the Benjamites migrate up into theirs and then into the Merovingian dynasty. So Mary Magdalene through Josephus, through Aragon, who marries Aminabad of the Merovingian bloodline. And then you also have the Davidic bloodline, allegedly through David, and through other bloodlines that are already associated in France that are intermarrying into the Anjou bloodlines and others to create this full-blown pedigree that Antichrist is likely to have. So, yeah, he's going to come right out of these ones. And in the French Anjou bloodline, they have him being introduced as the great monarch in Geyser Castle, where the cutting of the elms took place and the first Grand Master of the Parisian starts with Geezer to Geezer, and then St. Clair is, his wife is the next Grand Master. And that's the splitting away of the Templars after the fall of Jerusalem because they lost their way. Everything, once you start putting pieces together, it just gives you this 6,000-year connection to what they're trying to bring about.
Are you suggesting then that because the Watchers were able to take any form they wanted to, or take over a human form, that the Antichrist may well be a Watcher inhabiting the body of one of these people? It feels to me as though what you're talking about here is the godlike powers that the Watchers had, and it because they, there was at one point we talked about how Satan took the form of the disciple that betrayed Jesus,
Judas.
Judas. So is the Antichrist really an angel that is taking the form of a human?
Only in part. So he will be of the physical body. So what happens in this process is called the avatara. So in the traditional understanding is Vishnu is an avatar, and Buddha, who has his own spirit, his own soul and body, he accepts Vishnu into his soul, and it's a symbiotic relationship to give him the wisdom to start Buddhism, which is one of the allegories why Buddha is used for Antichrist as in the new Buddha. That's called an incarnation. And so the incarnation is what is understood as the Christ consciousness. And we would understand that Christ consciousness from a Christian perspective as the spirit of the Antichrist. So when you look at Mithra, and that's another allegory as Lord Maitreya, as we just talked about, he comes as an avatar into an avatara. So he's going to require a physical being to share that soul and body with, to add that additional power. And that's how he comes at every end of every age in the polytheist sort of understanding. So I would fully expect something like what you said, or you're talking about, where we have Satan who shows that he could enter into Judas to give him the courage to continue to betray Jesus. That's the avatara, and that there's a Antichrist figure who is a physical human being, probably a bloodline or a Nephilim of the end time, who is going to receive an angelic God spirit into him. And he may receive two. He may receive both Azazel and Satan, because he has all of the power of Satan, who gives him that power and can do all of the miracles that he needs to do to deceive the world. But he also honors a god of fortresses in the book of Daniel. And he does that in secret after he establishes his religion. Now that is an odd word there for God. It's actually Eloah, which is the plural feminine of El, and the feminine format of the male Elohim format of the word. And it's usually meant in applying the power. So you could translate it as that, but some people will say there's a secret mother goddess that he's worshiping, and that's possible too, except that when you look at the fortress words, that's the Hebrew word mauz, which comes from az, and azaz, which is the root word for Azazel. So he seems to be, honoring the god of the military, the god of fortresses versus a female goddess. But, I do admit you can translate that either way, but the context seems to go back to the destroyer of the antediluvian world. Azazel, who taught the arts and the craft of war. He taught the technology, the martial arts, the weaponry, everything involved in the war and the technology provided to destroy the world by fire was provided by Azazel, which is why he is the scapegoat. And he is the leader of the Watchers, according to the Book of Enoch. And we see Azazel as the second goat on the Day of Atonement that's sacrificed without any reason. The first goat is sacrificed for Israel's sins, but this goat is a scapegoat that is sacrificed that we're not told why. And that's the Hebrew word Azazel. And I think it's for the antediluvian sins, whom Azazel is the scapegoat. So everything sort of connects back to an incarnation of Azazel into Antichrist as you get the polytheist version of it, and as we connect that to what the Bible says. But yet there's also this factor that Satan is also sponsoring him. So maybe there's two, or maybe Satan is able to do something else to provide additional power and knowledge through him without the avatar, or maybe he commands Azazel to do it. We're not sure. You could sort of interpret that all those different ways, but Antichrist will be a combination of a descendant of a Nephilim, or a more recently created Nephilim, but some Nephilim pedigree of some sort, and he's going to be the avatara for an avatar, which is why we're being brainwashed with that whole concept to this day, and that the New Age Messiah is an incarnation of the Christ consciousness.
So, in other words, we're being handed a bunch of crap saying that we're going to create a new age, a new world order in the image of Atlantis and the grandeur and the beauty and the peace and the whatever. Basically, that's not true. What they're creating is a warrior nation. They're not creating the peace and prosperity. They're creating warriors.
Yeah, they want to create an alliance and a realm that is perpetual war motivated, not only against humans, but to be able to war against the God of the Bible. And so they're going to have that showdown with God once Antichrist takes power. They want that showdown because they believe they can win.
After all these years, I mean, it just, when you see how these bloodlines have been protected and have been manipulated, it's just absolutely frightening that they hold on to that belief that at some point in time they will rule the world, literally. But ruling the world doesn't make sense.
Well, they do rule the world. They have ruled the world, but it's like that, and I use this so often, and maybe it'll be in the more modern version of the similar story. You have that matriarchal allegories driven into the Highlander of the quickening and the fairy culture of the matriarchal bloodline. There can only be one. So even though you've had these rulers controlling the world, what they're fighting over is the one dynastic family that's going to rule, and they'll wipe out, many other ones, and who knows how many of the bloodlines will get wiped out. And that beheading that Antichrist introduces isn't for the humans. They can kill humans any way they want. But as we talked about in past shows, and particularly when we talked about Book 2, is beheading was how you ensured a Rephaim or a Nephilim stayed dead.
Mm-hmm. I just, it's when you look at it, and a lot of these dynasties, especially, the Rockefeller, especially for some reason, looking at how they have been manipulating all of us for such a great length of time. But it isn't just the Rockefellers; it's the DuPonts. It's those families that just seem to have money that never ends, and it doesn't.
Yeah.
So,
and between the oligarchs of industry and the banking cartel, they created trust funds where they funnel profits into, and then they use that to fund the globalist strategies and tactics. And so it's this tax-free money that they make that is just flowing into this movement. I mean, again, we can't imagine how much money just from the lower level families through that type of setup, because they control the government in the U.S. That's why it's so much opposition to a populist movement that's happening out there today, because that would upset the apple cart. And so they want to continue in their way so that they can fund their globalist agenda that they have been sworn with oaths to do as the stable of agents for the European bloodlines.
So how did Switzerland, that itty-bitty, teeny-weeny little country, how did it come about that nobody touches it, that's where the money is? I mean, that doesn't make sense to me. They should have been overrun all over the place. And, whatever government overran them got all the money. How was that set up so that no one ever touches Switzerland?
In the 1200s, the Knights of St. John set up an office or a location there, and the Knights of St. John is a sister organization to the Knights Templar. And so in 1307, the Knights Templar in France had their assets attempted to be taken, and they were disenfranchised, and the whole organization was disenfranchised all through Europe. But in France, you had Templars that fled before because they knew this was coming, because they're run by royals. So some had escaped to Scotland with some wealth and knowledge, but the true wealth went to Switzerland, to their sister organization that started the first form of the banking through that sort of wealth. So that was step one. Step two was in getting control of the Catholic Church with another Templar organization. They sponsored the Jesuits in the 1500s, late 1520s, and by about 1535 were an official order of the church to look after teaching, education, seminary schools. And they were sponsored by the Montesa order, which was the Royal order formed by the King of Spain. Calatrava was another order, sister organization that was set up in Portugal to do the same thing. But to seize the assets of the Templars in Spain so that the Catholic Church didn't get it, and the Calatrava order, again, they're just new Templars, just a different name that were set up. And the Montesa order is run by a fellow at the time of the start of the Jesuits with Ignatius of Loyola. The Grand Master of this Montesa order is Francis Borgia, of the black nobility of popes within the church. His grandfather, and I think he's got two distant relatives that are popes, and he's in the court of the King of Spain at that time. So he funds Ignatius, actually gets Ignatius out of jail once he's jailed because of the Inquisition, and that begins the ascent of the Jesuits. In about the early 1550s, you have Borgia resigning his government responsibilities and resigns, and his son takes over the Montesa order. And and a few years later, about 20, 30 years later, his son resigns, and that money now goes into the Spanish throne. So bear with me here. Borgia now joins the Jesuits, and in 1565 becomes the third Grand Master between the King of Spain, who has the Templar wealth at this point in time, and Borgia. They are going to bankrupt the Vatican through wars, and the Jesuits are going to take over the banking system as part of that settlement, and then they move the Vatican banking to Switzerland. The Rothschilds were set up after the fall of the Templars to replace the Templar banking because they needed that. And the Templar banking was also within the church, so they needed the Jesuits to replace the Templar banking within the Roman Church. So the Rothschilds became, through funding from the Royals, become the bankers of the Royals and are the ones who are going to create the stable of agents in the banking system that we know in the West today, all based on what the Templars had done. And eventually they move their banking to Switzerland. So you have all three of those big centers of banking of the West all in Switzerland, controlled by the Royals. And that is why you have a white cross on the Swiss flag. That is the cross of the Knights of St. John. And the superficial rise to banking in about the 1800s and maybe even a little bit back into the 1700s is just pablum for consumption of the mundane, and they just erase most of the history so that you don't follow why Switzerland becomes this protected place and is non-transparent in everything that it does, because that's the only safe place on earth to hide their wealth.
Well, I keep thinking about World War I and II, and it just seems to me, frankly, I wouldn't keep it in Switzerland. Is too easy to overrun. I mean, they have a lot of the money from the Jewish people that were trying to save their money and provide, hide it from the Nazis, and so they've got a lot of that money there that will never be touched because nobody can ever prove who they are or what their relationship was. So that money is sitting there, and it just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. Well, the only thing that makes sense is, first of all, I mean, if you go back a little bit in history, you can say you have all of these mountains, which is natural sort of protection, but there were some invasions. It may be a little bit costlier to do that, but you could battle wars, and the Swiss actually lost some battles. So the reason why they're not invaded is that's like neutral holy ground of the Royals. It's in everybody's interest to make sure that their wealth is kept secret and it's protected. So it's part of the Western Bloodline Alliance to keep that as the center where they can keep the money off the books and they can pull it out and utilize it anytime that they want. So in the Great Reset that the Committee of 300 through the Davos crew is trying to implement, lower level money like people like Bill Gates, Elon Musk, Bezos, who most people think are the richest people in the world, is small potatoes compared to the money that's in Switzerland. They will be asked, and they will comply, to give up all of their money in the Great Reset so that they can eliminate all debt around the world and eliminate all property ownership. And in return, during the reset, they will be completely funded by the Royals for their support in implementing the reset and giving up their wealth. They will become oligarchs all around the world, and they will become even richer. So fast forward to Revelation 18, as part of the great and mighty men of the end time are these merchants that have grown wealthy through Babylon. That's part of the connection to Davos, to Babylon, to the reset.
Well, if I had that much money, I think I would not admit it to anybody. I mean, that basically just sets you up to be killed.
Generally is the case, yes.
I mean, that's a little frightening. So what is the point of the one world religion? Also, apparently the Pope has been working on trying to combine. There is a church they're building. The Pope is building. I think it's in Dubai, but I'm not sure. That will be a combination.
Abu Dhabi.
Okay. That would be a combination of Judaism and Christianity and, is it Muslim?
Yes.
So is
that
the
is
the beginning?
It's the religious form of what the political arm was. They're both called the Abrahamic covenants.
Mm-hmm.
One is religious, that is the start, and obviously the political one is, through Israel and Saudi Arabia and countries that want to sign on to that arrangement to battle against Iran. So that is certainly a piece of how Babylon will come about. So we need to understand that Nostradamus prophesied a black pope to be the last pope. The prophecy of Malachi within the Catholic Church, he prophesied in the 1200s of all the popes that would come. And he said the last pope would be an anti-pope, a replacement pope. And so when Francis was elected to become pope, he replaced Benedict, who's still alive. So he is an anti-pope from that perspective. And so you can, everybody can decide, did Benedict get forced out? Was it health reasons? Whatever the reason, Francis is an anti-pope. And he is the leader of the Jesuits, which is called the Black Pope. And the White Pope leads the Vatican. So now that's consolidated. And for the first time, we have a Jesuit, the Black Pope, in charge of the Vatican. He is changing doctrine left, right, and center in preparation for the will of the world order, as he has mentioned many times. And he wants to be that part of that organizational structure. Now, the Templar dream was to set up the new Babylon within the church to bring about the new Babylon. And, of course, the Jesuits are the new Templars. So you start to see some connections. And Pope Francis is also made a lot of overtures to Buddhism and other polytheist religions around the world, and paying homage and worshiping the Mother Goddess when he was in South America. So he may be the last pope. There may be another. I mean, the prophecies of popes is not canon from a biblical perspective, so we have to be careful with non-canon prophecies. But he certainly is playing a role to prepare the church to be overturned. And the church is coming apart at the seams between the sexual scandals, the loosening of doctrines, the purge of conservatives, the outreach to other religions, the outreach to try and consolidate Christianity into the Roman Church. But again, none of this is going to happen until people are scared into doing it, and it's going to require the false prophets to do that. And so we're going to see this steady march from the religious side, just as we see the steady march by the economic side and the geopolitical side to set up Babylon in the end time, which makes the way for Antichrist. And understand that Babylon is a city, it is a universal religion, it is a geopolitical organization, and it is an economic organization, and sits on 7 hills, so likely in Rome, which are the 7 hills of Romulus and Remus, with Palatine Hill being the original sort of capital hill, although there's one called Capitol as well, but it's where the Sibylline prophecies of the Etruscans were originally located at, and Vaticanus Hill was a branch hill of the Sibylline prophets and of a branch operation to the Palatine Hills. So look for those original 7 hills to be the location. Some people say Constantinople, but the history and everything that's other information I don't have, not the show to go into it, I think points more to Rome than Constantinople, but you can make a good case for Constantinople. So we're seeing that connection as it's starting to form, but it's a slow march. And so people who are getting ahead of chronology in prophecy, they're trying to rush it. And it doesn't happen on our time. It happens on the ordained time. So it will happen when it happens. And Antichrist cannot come to power from a Christian perspective until the restrainer is removed.
Right. What role do the Illuminati play in all of this? I mean, it's an organization that we've heard about, but it feels like it's becoming more and more of a public organization than it has been in the past.
Yeah, and it sits just above the Masons, and it operates through the lodges that were created by Freemasonry all around the world. So as a home base into countries around the world, and that these are higher level adepts than Freemasonry adepts. So if you're going to oversee multiple Freemason lodges, you're going to be in the old degree, 5th degree, and you're kind of like a regional manager, while Illuminati would be a little higher than that. Now, these are probably more pure bloodline than the Masonic adepts, but still quite low level. But they will have people from the upper echelons that are working with them. So Freemasonry, their main agenda is to focus on politics and to supply people like into, running countries, the CFR, places like that, and also to control the media in some aspects as well. So, and then the other main piece of Freemasonry, and just as we saw this with like George Washington, was to control the military. Illuminati has a separate agenda as a trunk organization in the bringing about of the new Atlantis, and they're there to destroy Christianity and to aid in bringing about world government. So that's their main focuses. So all of the attacks that we see going on in terms of Christianity will be funded by Illuminati-sponsored organizations. The Illuminati also have connections of branch organizations onto university campuses. I would expect Freemasons would have connections as well for lower level bloodlines and genes, but the Skull and Bones is a Illuminati-sponsored organization, complete with the Illuminati symbol, and that is the initiatory organization for the pseudo-blue bloods of the Ivy League colleges. And through there, you're going to be moving into CFR, Trilateral Organization, and organizations like that.
Well, how do you equate the fact that if the point of all of this is to destroy Christianity, the church, the Pope, is involved in all of this. So is the Pope actually there to destroy the element of Christianity as well?
At times, for sure. You don't always have a Royale-sponsored Pope, but most often they are working the agenda to control the masses, and then the more extreme ones are actually trying to work the agenda from the Roman Church. And that's why the Jesuits were put back into it, to make sure that Babylon was going to be created through the church and to have control over the Roman Church. So, yeah, you have that Roman Church that is, in control of a Jesuit right now, and what he's trying to do is to become the religion of this new world order. And even that, and if that includes aliens, they're prepared to baptize aliens, or on record on saying that. So I would look at the leadership of the Roman Church as not to be beneficial to Christians, and I think we're seeing that more and more as it becomes more obvious. But Christianity is awfully tough to eliminate. So the only way that they're going to deliver a crushing blow to it is to de-deify Jesus. Because as Paul said, that our whole belief system stands on the one doctrine that Jesus was crucified and was resurrected. So they have to take that off the table if they're going to bring about Babylon. And that's partly what the Illuminati is working with. And they also partner with the Rosicrucians, because the Rosicrucians, one of their agendas is to control the entertainment and the literature and media type organizations like that. And that when we look at the de-deification of Jesus, the secrets are held in the literature, like the Holy Grail tales as one sort of example. But all of the entertainment holds their history, their genealogies, and their belief systems. So, I think when we look at the Roman Church, if it wasn't bad at times in terms of its leadership in history, we're going to see a complete turning of their backs on the nature of the Christian belief system, and they're going to lead them into Babylon.
So this is where global Gnosticism. Is this where global Gnosticism comes in?
Yes. So to create the global Gnosticism, they need to do a couple of things. One, and there's a lot of things, but these are the major things. One is they have to unite all of the polytheist religions under one umbrella and get on the table that they're all the same religion, just different vernacular names for the same gods. And they also have to bring in monotheism. And that begins with de-deifying Jesus, but they also have to utilize polytheist groups within monotheism to help. So they're going to utilize Kabbalism within the Judaic system. They're going to utilize Sufism within Islam. They're going to utilize, and they do a tremendous work on this with Gnosticism within the Christian religion, to change them into interpretive religions and to convert them so that they'll be the leaders following the false prophets and the anti-pope and all that are trying to bring about this new Babylon. So those are the two main things that they have to do. But again, they cannot get it done, just as the world government can't get done until the prophet's coming with a set number of catastrophes to convert to the true religion or be wiped from the face of the earth. Till they come on the stage, we're still in the sorrows, and they're still building. And we haven't entered into the last 7 years.
Well, that's a comfort to know. So where did the 1,000 points of light come from? I mean, I can remember, it was George Bush that was that talked about the 1,000 points of light?
Senior and junior.
Okay.
And Junior talked about it twice. The last time was at the eulogy for Senior that I'm aware of. He may have used it in secret speeches, and same with his father elsewhere. But it was in relationship with George Senior with the New World Order and 1,000 points of light. So what the heck is he talking about? Well, it's a Gnostic term. And the 1,000 points of light is the Nephilim seed that's been spread around the earth of the divine. And that's what they want to unite in this new world order. And so the 1,000 points of light is to try and collect all of those who have the genes and the bloodlines back together into one universal religion, one universal government, where it will create a scenario to be able to vibrate or evolve into godhood in the new age. So that 1,000 points of light is just polytheist doctrine that's thrown out there that comes right out of their Gnostic religion. So what global Gnosticism is, it's just a term that I coined. It's to bring all the polytheist religions back into their umbrella group. Now we see this reflected at the lowest levels of the Thelemic tree within Freemasonry, as they're inviting people out who have a gene, who have the bloodline, into the lower levels to learn about their ways, and if they are smart enough and have the desire and enough purity, they'll be permitted to become adepts. The only two qualifications is A, you have to be invited, so you have to be of the bloodlines. You have to have a spark of that divine that's been lost and spread around the world, and that you have to believe in a God. And then at first level of adept, you find out who your God is. It's Mithra. It is the great architect of the universe. It is Satan. It is Lucifer. Those are all different names. And probably Gadriel is also one of his names, as is, we understand him from Isaiah 14 as Hel, Heylel. So yeah, and as we talk about this spark of the divine, if you remember from earlier on in the book, I'm talking about a kind of giant in the Gnostics that's called Amaka Seth, and that he was first sort of planted at Gomorrah as a creation of giants, and then replanted again at Sodom after the flood. And he has a third incarnation that happens at the end time. And so it's called, and it comes out of the Sethians, according to Epiphanius. It's called the three incarnations of Seth. And so this incarnation of Amaka Seth is a descendant or a newly created Nephilim that Mithra will be the avatar of, that Azazel will likely be the avatar of, and Satan will have a play with the avatar of the future Antichrist. And in that book, they also believe that Jesus is a descendant of Seth and is kind of a Seth spirit. Now, this is not Seth of the Sethian line. This is Seth that's created by the higher mother called Barbello, that we also know in other Gnostic Gospels as a different name for Sophia. And of course, Sophia is the mother goddess who created the 12 archons that included in their belief system the God of the Bible and Satan. That's amongst those 12 archons through a nebulous life force to create those gods. And then Aiel de Boath, as they say, became evil and is the god of the flood and the God of the Bible. So they have this history, they have these religious texts, and they have these genealogies, and they're going to bring them all to play to bring Christianity to heal. And then they will also hit monotheism at the Moses level. And they will say that Moses actually was a bloodline of the Pharaoh, and that the story in the Bible was just a cover story or an allegory, that he was adopted, and that the Bible needs to be understood interpretively, so it's a fairy tale. So it doesn't have to be accurate at the superficial level. You have to be an adept to understand the true mysteries of the Bible. That's why Christians need to stay focused on the literal application, not the polytheist application and interpretation. So Moses learned the wisdom of Egypt, swore the oath to the gods of Egypt. This is the antediluvian religion. It's the second pillar of replanted Enochian mysticism that first ends up at Babel, and Nimrod stays in Babel and develops with the Magi that Eastern division that's going to move also into India with the Indo-Aryans. And you are going to have Egypt through Mizraim, who is going to establish with Harmine, who goes with him, or Hermes as we would know him, the second pillar of Enochian mysticism after the flood. And so you have these two pillars of Enochian mysticism that is coming down through the ages, and it's to unite with this understanding, is to unite not only the polytheist religions but also the monotheist religions, and that they believe that Moses did not bring monotheism with Israel, but brought the religion of Egypt to Israel, and then at the time of the monarchy it went rogue and into monotheism, and as a way to create a mythos for the royal family, beginning with King Saul's dynasty and then replaced with the Davidic dynasty.
Well, it certainly changes the way you look at a lot of things, that's for sure.
And
so,
what they're going to do is going to absolutely mystify people, and it's going to be so believable. And they're going to have all of these ancient records.
Are they actually going to find, do you believe, I mean, they're talking about the treasures that are buried theoretically under the Sphinx or in Egypt or even at Oak Island. Frankly, I think the treasures are more likely wisdom
knowledge.
And information.
Yep.
Yeah, knowledge rather than gold, silver, and whatever.
Yeah, I think so, because the secret societies have been protecting this treasure and knowledge all the way through. And even in Judaism, you have the Essenes, which is a branch of the Egyptian Therapeutate, and they call themselves Nazarenes, which isn't from Nazareth, but from the Hebrew word Natsar, meaning to watch and to guard this knowledge of the angels, and they wouldn't give up the names of the angels they worshipped or their knowledge, even upon torture and death. And the Judaic people also brought back Kabbalism from Babylon into the age of the Second Temple, and people might be surprised to know that the word Kabbalah or Kabbalism or Kabbalist, whether it's a K or a C for the spelling, is a Judaic word, and it comes from number 6902, Kabbal, and it means to receive or take, and to be the receivers of knowledge. And it is a word that will be used in the Bible in similar type of aspects, but not to the way that it's been shaped to be the official name of polytheism within the Judaic religion and culture. So anything to do with the Talmud, writings like that, that's the polytheist side or the Kabbalistic side.
So I could see how they could discover writings that could be carbon dated to whatever is the appropriate time frame that would change the Bible and certainly the story that has been woven for us for thousands of years, so that is it to their advantage to have that wisdom open up, or is it to their advantage to not open up that wisdom? I mean, I do believe they've got the wisdom. Is it a matter of when is the best time for them to put it forward to take the stability out of the church?
They believe that they will only get one real opportunity to utilize this, and so strategic timing is everything. So they keep control of the knowledge and the information. They let a little bit more out as we go, but always to move the world to be cattle herded in the direction that they want it to go. Eventually, we're going to see stuff that comes out that's going to overturn every preconceived notion. And if that sounds familiar, that's what happens to a second degree or 32nd degree Mason who becomes 33rd degree adept or 3rd degree Yorkite, and learns the true knowledge and the meanings, and is just at the beginning of the area of true knowledge, but all of their ideas are said to be completely overturned, anything that they had preconceived. That sounds familiar. That's the same information, words, and predictions coming out of what's going on in Antarctica, that once they release that, it will overturn all preconceived understanding of our history. That's the same MO that is used with the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Gnostic Gospels that were written in the same time by groups like the Essenes, like the Alexandrian Gnostics, like all of the different mystic groups that were in the covenant land, who adopted Jesus, and as I talk about throughout the book, also, you know, Mary Magdalene, Joseph of Arimathea, James, and John the Baptist, and others as Essenes into them, but where in this case, Jesus is not the Son of God. He is a teacher of righteousness. He is a prophet, but he's a mortal, and he was not resurrected to heaven. So they have gospels that have been discovered that now say, well, this is opposing the Christian gospels of that time. But understand there's two distinct beliefs in terms of who Jesus was at that time, one that they became the Christian religion through their disciples, and then the polytheists, who, just like Simon the Magus, wanted to have the power that Peter had with the Holy Spirit. They wanted to be able to have that power and control and that mythos as part of their global Gnosticism that they were building. So expect to see evidence more like those things that I said, that is going to bring down Christianity to the point of where it's going to convert into the Babylon. But there will always be a few that will stick to the Bible, and those are the ones that will have to be persecuted in the tribulation of the saints in the first 3.5 years. And there's a tribulation that's ongoing for another 3 years before that, as Revelation 2:10. So there's about, for the saints, we're going to go through persecution similar to what Christians did in the time of Rome, but even more so, because it always gets stronger as time goes on.
In looking at all of this and the hierarchies and the invisible whatevers and everything, it makes those of us who are normal cannon fodder. I mean, it's a matter of, are we being used to fight wars so others don't have to get their hands dirty?
Yeah, when you look at how wars were fought, the nobility were the generals, they were the officers. Now, some of the nobility got killed in the battles, but most did not. And, even the knights and the chariot riders were nobility. So depending on how high you up, how close you got into the battle in their warrior society. And the analogy is sort of look at a chessboard where you have your royal court, you have your bishops for your religious organization, and then you have your army with the knight and the rook, which is basically a tower or a mighty one. And that's your nobility class that are dictating the war, and then the humans are the pawns, or the cannon fodder. We were the foot soldiers, and we didn't get the weapons. They were just there to, I guess, be sacrificed for the most part. And the use of numbers would be helpful. So, yeah, you could look at it in that sort of way for sure.
And when you look at the fact that they're saying globally they want the population to be down, it doesn't mean that they want their population to be down. It's the common folk that they want to decrease the population of.
Yeah, just like those Rosicrucian guidestones that were up in Georgia. Now they're down, I guess, but there's a certain, they don't want humans to become too popular.
Wise. Well, actually, it was just one of the 3 stones that was destroyed, but they destroyed the other 2 as well to kind of wipe it all out, which I found very strange.
Yeah, very, very strange. And so when we look at the West and we see secret societies, we're talking about the Rosicrucians, which are, the sort of the midway up on the phylemic tree, and all the trunk organizations have branch organizations with hierarchies, coming in and out. That is the organization that is 50% purebloods at the top, and then you have the rising ones from Freemasonry and Illuminati that's going to populate the bottom side of that order. And so, like the Rosicrucians, had 3 different levels in terms of that inner relationship as well. And so the first order taught the esoteric Kabbalah philosophy. So Kabbalism, Jewish mysticism has a role in the secret societies. They don't control it, and this is at the Rosicrucian level, but they'll have bloodlines that have intermarried with the top 3 thelemic tree trunk orders. So the first order taught the Kabbalah philosophy. They taught astrology. They taught tarot and geomancy. And then the second order taught magic, alchemy, and astral travel. So you see a higher level there. Then the third order are the ascended masters. These are the true adepts of the bloodlines in the celestial brotherhood, and they're guiding the lower levels underneath them. Societies, if we have this model of them connected to Gnosticism in the West, connected to the royal families, we should see this model elsewhere in the world if it's a true order, and we do. They're not well known, but understand that, let's say, the Chinese dynasty, for example, of the Shah dynasty, that was overthrown by the Western bloodlines with social masonry, just like the junior offshoot of the Putian and the Romanovs were overthrown by communism, an extension of social masonry. And then National Socialism was used against the Kaisers, and then to try and offset communism, but then they had to take National Socialism out as well. Understand that the notion or the idea of secret societies is even more so in the Chinese and Southeast Asia than it is in the West. And so you have many secret societies. I won't go into too much minutiae on it, but just to give people an idea of it, you have the Wutsu Society, which is equivalent to Freemasonry in terms of where it fits on their thelemic tree. And you have other organizations like the Red Spear Society, which is kind of a military type of society, so it's connected into that aspect of it. You have the Green Gang Society. You have the White Lotus Society. You have the Hayong Society. You have the Triads, which is the dark side, which is like the mafia, which is also initiatory organizations. And all of these organizations in China and Southeast Asia are run by members of the Li family, and the 2 dynastic bloodline names for the original emperors, and it's all one string of dragon emperors from dragon creator gods, was Li, spelled L-I, and we see some as L-E-E, and there's a couple other transliterations of Li as well into English, and also X-I, which is Shi of the Shah dynasty, and we have a Shi that's president of China today from the western branch of the Shah dynasty. And that's just a few of the organizations there. There are more, and that the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers closely associated with the Li families, and the Lees in the Communist Party after the fall, and that they were considered equals in terms of where they fit in terms of the bloodlines and where their organization sort of fits. So they looked at the organizational structure as equals and the bloodlines as equals, rivals, but equals. And so it's important to understand that there's been this communication between these societies and bloodlines all throughout history. And again, they don't like to let us know that. We do get a little bit of it in entertainment where you have these secret royal governing societies that are like the White Brotherhood and other names that rule in secrecy. But we don't get much real information on it.
It just seems that those things, especially the Great White Brotherhood, an area where people have been deluded that this was a very pure form of mysticism, and to find that it's not is a little horrifying. It makes you step back from almost every kind of organization and question as to, what's their genealogy, where are they coming from? Is this somebody I want to be connected to, or is this something I don't? And you're left almost standing alone because you don't know which direction to go.
Yeah, and anytime there's been bloodlines overthrown by strongmen, that they tend to be corrupt and go corrupt, and they're no better than the royals, except that they're not trying to destroy us from the face of the earth, I suppose.
A minor thing.
A minor thing.
I mean, when you stop to think about it, those who are not members of these organizations and stuff are sort of being shoved around by the whims of their inner power struggles, and kind of being told, just don't question, just do what I say. And then you get to the fact that the churches are involved and that our political systems are involved. So where do you turn? I mean, there is that element of the inner faith and all of that, but you're also living in a physical reality, and you just don't know who to trust anymore.
You don't, but that's, and that's why a lot of Christians don't vote when it's to me, I understand why, because they think everything is corrupted, but you can influence the world when you have opportunity, as what we do in democracy. So you have to participate, you have to vote, and we can know them by their fruits. And we can know them if they're lying. And we have to support those who aren't doing evil, those who aren't wanting this globalist society. And sometimes, you know what? If you're being a true Christian, I think even though you might be voting for the lesser of two evils, less evil is better than more evil. You're still having a positive influence by participating to a certain degree versus not participating. And again, we all have free choice, and every choice is a decision. So if you abstain, then I would suggest you have made a choice. You just haven't realized it.
Yeah, true. I mean, with looking at what's going on in the world today with Ukraine and with Israel and Taiwan eventually, and China. I mean, there are, you see the power struggles, but you don't really understand what's at the bottom of the struggle. It's not so much the territory as it is the power and the influence that goes with the territory. And as we look at the battles that are now ongoing and probably will be for a long time, it's a matter of it's too bad there aren't bleachers where you can sit in the bleachers and not be affected by any of this stuff. I've often said that humanity in and of itself are pieces of a game, and we don't know what the game is, but we're being moved around by powers that we don't understand.
Yeah, and not only is it about the power and the influence, it's who is going to run that zone for an answer to which particular god of the council of the gods for that particular nation. And so the council of the gods runs this world as the invisible ones, and they give that divine right to rule to their spurious offspring. And they're also known as the invisible ones. And the council of the gods is, from a biblical perspective, is in Psalms 82, and we've already covered off in other shows the 70 nations that Deuteronomy 32 records, both before and after the floods, that the gods rule over. So there's a hierarchy in there as well. So we need to understand that aspect of it. We also need to understand that each of these power centers and nations, even though they may be related, as the Ukrainians are related to the Russians, they still have some rivalries that are going on in there. But it's about who has control over the larger sort of ethnic group that we're seeing there now. And all of the cultures and religions have this Antichrist Messiah promise. So, like the Jewish people are looking for a different Messiah to come back other than Jesus. So they're looking for a Messiah. And that plays into what happens in Israel. And Christians are looking for Jesus to come back. The Sunni have the Mahdi, but so do the Shia have a Mahdi, but they're two separate Mahdis, and they actually do battle with each other in the end time. And then you have this Lord Maitreya and the new Buddha, and you have the great monarch. You have all of these different names around the world for Antichrist figures of different bloodlines. And we have this great war that's in Ezekiel 38 and 39 that I think is Joel 1 and 2 and the Revelation 9 war that Antichrist uses as his Armageddon to become the false Messiah, that he requires as part of that mythos and prophetic fulfillment. You have somebody named Gog of Magog, chief prince of Meshech. Now, what's really interesting about that is Meshech is the etymological root for the city of Moscow, and the Rus were Scythians, and the original czars were Scythians that were set up in Kiev. And Gog is a giant's name, and it doesn't come out of the Table of Nations. Magog does, but Magog was a giant as well. And Gog is a son of, there's Gog before the flood, and there's Gog after the flood. So there's different giants named Gog, but they're a giant nonetheless. The first one is the son of Iapetus and Cleito in Greek mythology. And Gog is, as it's understood in its definition, as you take it back to the original Hebrew and the original Greek in the New Testament, as Gog shows up, is a term for an end-time Antichrist figure, not the Antichrist, but an Antichrist-type figure. So now you're starting to reach all around the world with these different types of Antichrist figures, and Jesus warned there would be many Antichrists, and the epistles of John back that up.
Where do you see, you mentioned Antarctica, and I've often felt that there was something that was going to be coming out of that area. What do you see as coming out of that area that's going to change things?
Well, I think it rewrites our history. I'm not quite sure the narrative that they're going to bring to it, but it'll unite the alien mythos, ancient alien mythos. It'll substantiate, I think, polytheist history and polytheist religions. It'll substantiate the gods, whether they're presented as very advanced aliens or as gods. They need to have a cover story to start reintroducing these figures. And they're going to have technology, and they're going to have evidence that's going to overachieve everything we've been taught, religious or education-wise, and just overwhelm us so much so that we're going to be prepared to accept almost anything, including signing up the battle, the evil god of the universe, as he is labeled, the God of the Bible. So what comes out of there is just going to just be like a tidal wave that reorganizes so many things around the world. It's just, when does that information come out? We're not told when, but what we are told is the political class and the nobility class and continues to make trips down there to be brought up to speed as to what's there.
Yeah, that's the feeling that I was getting. I just didn't know when we were going to actually have any information, hopefully this lifetime. And I would love to see what is coming out of Antarctica. And the other thing, selfish, yes, but that is selfish. I'd love to see Oak Island finally, either sink or give up what it's hiding.
There's nothing there.
I didn't think there was, but they keep going after it.
Well, it's great theater. So, I was listening and did my best to get it verified, and I did to a certain degree. But I was listening to an order that's still in Canada, and it's kind of a successor to the Templar order. So this fellow was a Templar, and he was higher than a Freemason adept. So I'm not sure quite where that fit in. So it's higher than the Freemasonic ritual. So he's probably Rosicrucian, somewhere in that sort of category. But he said you can look forever in places like Roslyn Castle, Roslyn Chapel, Oak Island. He said the treasures were there, but they're no longer there. They were removed, well over 100 years ago, and they were split up again. And as treaties were made with First Nations in North America, they went in behind and negotiated another treaty with the bloodline chiefs. And if people aren't aware, chiefs are bloodline, and it's a four-class system still in place. Same thing that was all over the world, and same as the feudal system was. And so they made arrangements to store their treasures and knowledge on reserves, where it was away from the oversight of the democratic or local governments, that they didn't have the authority to go in and get those assets. So they're split up and they're secretly located, and they'll bring them out when they're ready, and they can dig for as long as they want and do as many years on Oak Island as they want. They may find a coin or a ring, but they're not going to find anything substantial.
I didn't think so. It's just that I've watched it. It's
just misdirection. I think he also said it was misdirection to keep people focused there than elsewhere.
Well, yeah. And my thought is, I've watched it for 10 or 11 years, and I've been quite faithful. And of course, the year I decide not to watch it is when they'll find something. But they've certainly found a lot of archaeological stuff, which is fascinating. But But again, it doesn't satisfy the treasure lust that everybody has a little bit of. The
understanding, I'll just throw this little tidbit in, and it won't take long. The angel that's hung upside down at Roslyn Castle, and understand that Oak Island was funded and founded by the Sinclair family, who's upside down with this pearls of wisdom, which is that ancient knowledge allegory, is Azazel. Everything's connected. You just have to look for those connections.
Which is frightening. But it's amazing. We still have 2 more sections to go through. I can't imagine where we go from here, but I am, overwhelmed by a lot of this material, especially going into the New World Order material. I had, New World Order is something that we hear a lot of, but then you went into the pyramid and the all-seeing eye, and the fact that Masonry was so integrated into our political system that it's overrun. So there's no way you can clean up the corruption that has been interwoven to such a degree that it's impossible.
Well, you have to have a populist movement to do so. And then you have to take on this globalist left-wing hegemony sponsored by the Royals that control everything to try and drain the swamp, so to speak, to clean that all out and put measures back in place. But we're witnessing what happens when a populist movement challenges the global hegemony, is the whole world rises up against them. So it's not easy. It can be done, but not the odds of being successful on a global scale is unlikely, but you could get there from a national scale.
It's going to be interesting. I noticed the time. Mark just reminded me. I keep forgetting we're actually doing a radio show and not just talking. You want to give out your information, where you can be found and how people can get a hold of you and stuff?
Yeah, so the best way to get a hold of me is through my website at the Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's Genesis 6, the number 6conspiracy.com. On that website, there's a contact the author. So if you want to ask me a question or try and get a little bit more information on something, that's how you get a hold of me. If you are looking to find out what's in my books, I have a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters of Book 1 on the website and Book 2 on the website. If you wanted to get a signed copy, you go over to the Buy Now page and to Book 1 or Book 2. And if you wanted to order, that's where you get a signed copy. And I have the pages split up into 3 different geography zones. I'm in Canada. I live in Canada, so I ship out of Canada. So there's a Canadian page, there's a U.S. page, and if you live anywhere else in the world, there's an international page. There's a link over for people to barnesandnoble.com, barnesandnoble.ca, and Amazon.com. There's also a link on the website for the Kindle version as well if you want the digital version. Soon, probably by the end of the year, I'll have links up for the Audible version for Book 1. That's been out for a couple of months and I think is doing quite well on the Audible market. Book 2, I received notice that Audible has been completed. I will be getting the files to review, so we're hoping to have that released by the end of November, latest, hopefully in a couple of weeks, depending on how fast the approval process goes. And so I'll have links up for that. But in the meantime, the first book is distributed by Amazon ACX. It's on Amazon Audible, and it's also available through iTunes. And Book 2 will have the same distribution network.
Wow. And you do respond to people that write you questions. I want to thank you so much. I'm looking forward to the next section, to being absolutely overwhelmed and shocked and disappointed and yet encouraged. You're popping a lot of balloons here. But it's knowledge is an amazing weapon to give people and to give them insight into what's going on is really profound. And I thank you so much for all of your work, all of your research, and what you're putting out there, because it does change the way you look at everything. So and I will encourage people to go and check out the Committee of 300. It's on Google. You can find it easily. Yeah. Pop a couple of balloons there. Thank you so much again, Gary, and I will look forward to next week for 7 to see what we can get into there.
Yeah, I think people are going to love that show as well. It's, again, as with all the sections, it's loaded with information, and we'll connect dots again in ways that most people had not considered.
I look forward to reading it, and I will talk to you next week. Thank you again, and thank you, everybody, for listening. Pick up the book, read the section. It's got so much more than what Gary shared, but it is it's astounding, the material. It's definitely worth the education. Till next week, with Gary. I'm going to do a show with Solaris on Wednesday, and on Friday we're going to have a reading show. So check it out. Good night.